Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new self-titled Kaytramine record. Kaytramine is the kind of collaboration or super duo that could really greatly outshine virtually any super group that you could find out there today. I mean, look at both halves of this duo. On one side of the ring, you have Kaytranada, one of the most legendary, well-liked producers in modern music as we know it, with a distinct production style that has landed him in the realm of modern-day legendary artists, and an artist that is well on his way to becoming a legacy artist in and of himself, as he continues to pave the way for a number of electronic and dance-based styles that are now being revitalized in the context of mainstream music, in part thanks to his particular brand of infusing house music within his own instrumentation. On the other hand, you have Amine, who is one of the more generally well-respected rappers out there today to debut within the past handful of years. I'm not necessarily saying that he's some modern-day Nas or anything like that in terms of respect that he gets from the music industry as a whole, but nonetheless, he's been working his way up the ranks and slowly becoming one of the more household name rappers out there today, as well as someone that is greatly loved both by the general public and critics alike, generally speaking. The point that I'm trying to make is that the collaborative name alone, Kaytramine, was bound to have a lot of hype behind it in the first place. There's nothing stopping the hype from occurring, and honestly, I would go as far as to argue that there has not been this much of a hyped up collaborative work since maybe Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars came together to do Silk Sonic in 2020. Not necessarily saying that those are the same thing, obviously they're very different, but my point still stands. What I'm trying to say is that Kaytramine is the kind of record that a lot of people were looking forward to. That being said, it would have also been incredibly easy for both halves of the duo to just become complacent. I mean, Kaytranada is still, again, one of the most well-loved producers in the entirety of the music industry at the moment, with his album 99.9% being one of the most popular records in general of the past handful of years, one of the most popular, heavily groove-laden records of the past decade, no question, and Amine is still on his stride from his last full-length solo studio album, 2020's Limbo, a record that found him getting a fair amount of praise from critics and, again, the general public. The two of them could have just completely phoned it in, and they would still reach the same level of popularity that they've always had while raking in some extra bucks just because of the fact that they collaborated. And, well, like I said, this is a pretty hyped up release as a whole. They were always going to make a fair amount of money off of this, no matter how good or bad it was. The singles could have been the most atrocious thing ever put out to mankind. It could have been burn it with fire levels of awful. And you know what? People still would have listened to it. I still would have listened to it. It would be a complete and total, just straight up lie if I said that this project brought out the best in either or Kaytranada or Amine, but at the same time, it brings out some pretty solid work from both of them. Some very, very good work at times. In fact, some of the performances and some of the production that's found here are better than I was initially expecting. Kaytranada has become widely renowned in the modern-day music scene for a lot of his lush and often house-influenced instrumentation. I mean, really, he's become one of the most distinct voices out there as a producer today, and his solo career is doing incredibly well too, for good reason. Even without a super famous producer tag or any sort of consistent beat structure, Kaytranada is still someone who is immediately recognizable in terms of tone, and thankfully his influence is fittingly spread across an album that's meant to be heavily reliant on vibes. Again, I'm not going to say that some of Kaytranada's best work is found here. His most impressive and groove-laden works are certainly not on this album. In fact, they go quite a while back if I'm being totally honest, but at the same time, he still brings to the table some strong work here, as he really does do his own thing, creating sounds he's entirely known for on his own terms with house influences, while also orienting his sound in a bit more of a straightforward meat and potatoes pop rap direction that more appropriately suits Amine as a rapper. You have a lot of cuts here, like the major highlight Master P, that are ultimately defined by Kaytranada's production style, and that is a style that ranges from having roots in old school pop music to having newer, more modern, and more refreshing roots in a number of modern influences that range from dance/R&B fusion to modern electronic and pop music, alongside some of, again, more straightforward meat and potatoes influences from the general realm of pop rap. Despite the fact that he does stand alongside one of the greatest producers in the modern day music industry, Amine, for the most part, manages to hold his own throughout the entirety of this record. In fact, I would go as far as to argue that some of Amine's best performances to date are found periodically throughout this album. He isn't really at his absolute best here, but at the same time, you do have tracks like STFU3 or Who He Is that really deliver some of the best flows and performances with a huge amount of charisma that we've seen from Amine to date. And while he's not cranked up to an 11 or anything like that, he doesn't really need to be either. In fact, Amine's choice to have a flow and style of delivery that's generally more loose and a little bit more just fluid, generally speaking, beautifully complements the summery atmosphere that's found throughout the entirety of this collaboration. This is, again, meant to be a very vibe-based album, a very tone-based album that's just meant to be for kind of good times, thoughtless times. It's not necessarily a thinking man's album, and it's not even remotely trying to be, and Amine could have easily messed that up by going into intricate verses and spiritual, lyrical styles, and he just doesn't. He does his thing, and he does it well, and it suits the tone of the record perfectly. It should be said that Amine's lyrical content is not necessarily the best. He's not really firing on all cylinders in that regard throughout the Kaytramine project. This especially rings true for tracks such as Forever, where he kind of tries to be flirty and sexual, and it just comes across as somewhat stiff and awkward, like he's some sort of try-hard wannabe player, and he's just not in any way. I mean, I'm sure that the dude is very charismatic as a person, but as it stands in his music, he just can't pull it off, at least not here. As a whole, however, I do have to say that I genuinely believe Amine was the right person for the job in regards to being Kaytranada's partner in crime for the sake of this record. Honestly, the biggest flaw that Kaytramine as a duo faces has less to do with the namesake performers and more to do with the musicians that they choose to actively work with throughout the entirety of their debut. The features here are largely harmless, but they also often feel like a major missed opportunity as well. I mean, you have the powerful flow of a rapper like Freddie Gibbs, the sheer charisma of a rapper like Snoop Dogg, and the general musical ability and talent of musicians like Pharrell Williams and Amine. These are all musicians who have proven themselves to be great artists in their own ways over the course of their careers, and as such, you would assume that Kaytranada and Amine's collaboration would also be a means for these artists to shine in their own right to a nearly equal extent as the namesake artists. And this is just, unfortunately, not the case. While none of the features here are outright bad or even really weak in the grand scheme of things, they just kind of come and go without much impact on the record as a whole. And it's not necessarily that bad artists were chosen. Most of the artists here are capable of pandering towards the specific tone and light nature of a record like Kaytramine, but somehow it just doesn't work out. I mean, it's especially baffling when you consider the fact that some of the featured artists on here were involved in genuine modern-day classics, like Freddie Gibbs' Pinata, or the Pharrell Williams-involved Nerds No One Ever Really Dies. These are some of the most beloved albums of the past decade, give or take. And these are also artists that just don't have much impact on the entirety of Kaytramine as a whole. They just feel underutilized and underappreciated in the context of their abilities in this album. These features don't necessarily drag down the record to any extent, but at the same time, it feels like great artists being picked up and then just being used for nothing. And that's really tragic, if I'm being totally honest, even if it does ultimately allow Kaytranada and Amine to shine a little bit more in their own respective ways. I really am glad that there are features here, as there are a lot of times where a number of different rappers will just choose to have limited features or no features throughout their music, and for some people that works beautifully, you know, but in the context of a record like Kaytramine, where everything is very loose, it's very upbeat, it's very fun, I kind of feel like features are almost a necessity, and they are here, and I'm glad that they're here. I'm glad that that was something that ultimately made it to the final cut throughout the creative process, that at least some features made it to the final record. It's just a shame that those features are also not particularly good. They're not bad, but they don't really stick out in any way either, which is a bit shocking considering who delivers them. Like, it's one thing if Nav or Russ delivers a bad verse or a mediocre verse, but come on, Snoop, you're better than this, I think. I think you're better than this. Look, I'll be totally honest. Kaytramine is a very easy album to criticize. Kaytranada doesn't deliver the best work of his career by any means, and Amine nearly has as many lyrical misses as he does hits. That doesn't even mention the features, which, again, based on star power alone, you would assume are great, or at least pretty decent, and they end up being absolutely nothing, lacking any and all impact. That being said, the intention of the Kaytramine collaboration was never to reinvent the wheel. It was just to make something that was good vibes for the summertime, and you know what? That's exactly what they did. There are times where the musical landscape just needs something kind of light and fluffy. And yeah, sure, this album's light and fluffy, but that's kind of a good thing at times. I wouldn't want this record to be some sort of hour-and-a-half long biblical epic or anything like that. And it just so happens that this light and fluffy, good vibes kind of sound is being produced by two incredibly talented musicians at a pretty consistent success rate as a whole. I think that's ultimately just a bonus in the end. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.